So the title of the notes for the beginning of this chapter is two-way tables. We're going to be talking about categorical variables. It's been a long time since we've talked about that vocabulary word. Categorical just simply means, like on a survey, if I asked you a yes or no question, your answer would be yes or no. It's not going to be a number. It's going to be some kind of a word answer. It's going to put you into a category with other people that have the same answer as you. So these two-way tables, let's kind of read this beginning part. In Unit 1, you learned how to display the distribution of a single categorical variable, and that should say using, not suing, using a bar chart or pie chart. So we did that at the way beginning when you were brand new to this class. We kind of practiced making bar charts and pie charts and things. But if you have a data set that involves two different categorical variables, you can organize your data in what's called a two-way table. And the next class period, I'm going to show you how to make a segmented bar chart, which is a way to make a chart of all of this data. For example, Yellowstone National Park staff surveyed a random sample of 1,526 winter visitors to the park. They asked each person whether they belonged to an environmental club, so that's a yes or no question that those people answered, like the Sierra Club. Respondents were also asked whether they had owned, rented, or had never used a snowmobile before. So again, those answers are not just numbers, they're words. So here's the data that was gathered. So the first person that was surveyed said that they weren't a member of an environmental club and that they owned a snowmobile and so forth, okay? And they went, this chart would go all the way down to 1,526. Well, this two-way table summarizes the data of all 1,526 people who took the survey. So kind of just stare at this for a second and figure out how it's organized. Our two categorical variables are you part of an environmental club or not? So we've got a column of people who said no, they're not, and the total added up for us at the bottom, and a column of people that said that they are a member of an environmental club. There was a total of 305 of those. Your second categorical variable is split up into do you own a snowmobile, do you rent one, or have you never used one? And so those rows split those categories apart, and the totals are over here. And if you'll notice, the very bottom right-hand corner, that is every single person that was surveyed is represented in this two-way table. So all you're going to be learning to do today is how to read this, and I'll ask you questions about percentages and proportions of people out of these tables, okay? A two-way table is a table of counts. And way back in chapter 1, we talked about how the fact that counts are called frequencies. So if you were trying to find some information about two-way tables on the internet, sometimes they're called two-way frequency tables because they just show the counts of how many people are in each category. It summarizes data on the relationship between two categorical variables, hence two-way table, for a group of individuals. I bet a lot of you can answer this first question without any help from me. What percent of people in the sample, so I'm going to use orange for this, so of people in the sample, you're going to learn that these are all worded the same, and the very first part of the word problem where it says of blank, that's going to end up being the denominator of the fraction that we build. So of everybody in the sample, I'm going to circle this number in orange, 1,526, because that's going to automatically be the denominator of this fraction. So of the people in the sample, what percent are environmental club members? So they answer yes, they are environmental club members. So look at your data. How many people are environmental club members? 305. They said, yes, we are part of an environmental club. So that 305, the second part of the word problem, that number goes on top of the fraction. And then you just simply divide and give me the percent. It asks for a percent, so I want to make sure my answer is a percent. Hopefully by now we're used to that sort of thing. So 305 over 1,526. 305 people out of everybody. If we round that to the nearest hundredth, so I would always bump your decimal over. If it asks for a percent, bump your decimal over and then round. Would that be 19.99%? So almost 20%. That's the percent of people out of everybody in the sample who are members, who answered yes, I'm a member of an environmental club. Number 2, what proportion of the people sampled, so I already know everybody that was in the sample is the denominator. These are going to get increasingly more difficult, so don't think the whole lesson is going to be this easy. What proportion of the people sampled, so out of everybody, have never used a snowmobile? So look up there in the table. I'm going to do this one in purple. So of the people in the sample, that's everybody. I'm just going to recircle that in purple. How many said that they'd never used a snowmobile total? 657. Never used a snowmobile becomes the numerator. So 657 people out of 1,526. Before you bump your decimal over and give me a percent, look back at the question. It asks for a proportion. So the only difference here is, well, the calculator is going to go ahead and give you the proportion. So just leave it as 0.43. Now I want you to notice something, because I'm thinking of the tests that you're going to have at the end of this chapter. Next 6 weeks. It's going to be a while. You're going to have to know what types of relative frequencies we're talking about. And there's 3 kinds. There's marginal, there's joint, and there's conditional. I want you to look at the numbers that we circled, okay, or you may have highlighted. All of those numbers that we use for these 2 problems come from the edges of the table. Okay, the edges, the outskirts, otherwise known as the margins. So this is called marginal relative frequency. Look at the bottom of your page in the box. It's kind of a definition here. What you just found are marginal relative frequencies. Notice you use numbers that were found in the margins. So if your homework problem asks you to find a percent of people who blah, 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 and then it says, what kind of relative frequency is this? And you look back and both of your numbers came from the edge, then you're going to say it's marginal relative frequency. And relative frequency just means proportion or percent. Okay, turn the page. I went ahead and copied and pasted the snowmobile table over so we didn't have to keep flipping back and forth. But let's try some more. So this is the same table of values. It says what percent, so percent, of people sampled, so right away that indicates out of everybody who was sampled, the first portion of the word problem, the of blank, is going to be your denominator. Okay, they're not environmental club members. The key word here is and. When your word problems have and in them, we're going to talk about this in just a minute. That's how you know it's joint relative frequency. But they're not environmental club members, so that narrows it down to this column. And they have never used a snowmobile. So what number out of the no column is never used? Okay, so I mean it's not like that difficult. So out of everybody, the number of people who are not environmental club members and have never used a snowmobile are this 445. Okay, use your calculator, turn that into a percent. It doesn't really feel like this is something we should be doing in statistics. It's pretty easy. 29.16%, I believe. If we go ahead and bump the decimal over first and then round to the nearest hundredth, which is what I'd kind of like you to do just to be consistent. Okay, number 4. What proportion of people sampled, so we've still got that denominator, 1,526, so of everybody sampled, are environmental club members, so they're in the yes column, and they have rented a snowmobile. So they're in the yes column, and we go to rent. So that's 77 people. It asks for a proportion, so if you'll just do 77 divided by 1,526, your calculator gives you the proportion. Round to the nearest hundredth. So a pretty small proportion of people there, that would only be 5% of people sampled are environmental club members and have rented a snowmobile. Okay, what you just found, so we talked about marginal frequency being on the edges. What you just found was called joint relative frequency because they give you the percent or proportion of individuals that have a specific value for one categorical variable. For instance, they are environmental club members, and a specific value for another one. They've rented a snowmobile. You don't need to memorize that big fancy definition. Just know that joint relative frequencies, as you read through those problems, you'll see the word and. It joins two things together. And I didn't need a ton of examples of those, okay? And then the last type of relative frequency, if you're looking ahead, is called conditional. Let's see what these are like. What percent of environmental club members? Okay, now slow down on this one because all of a sudden, the first part, the of part, that's the denominator, we're only talking about environmental club members. So in this table, how many people are environmental club members? 305. So you have to know how to read these. Just go to the, yes, I am a member of an environmental club. So 305 is the denominator in this problem. It doesn't say out of everybody in the sample anymore. It just says of these specific people. So condition is that they are club members, and then snowmobile owners. So you only are allowed to look in this column, go to snowmobile owners, and that is 16. 16 out of 305. Well, that's really as complicated as it gets, you guys. Once a percent. If you are looking in Schoology, I did this one incorrectly. So the key in Schoology on this one is incorrect. So I hope you didn't copy that down. All right, bump your decimal over. So 5.25%. Try the next one on your own. I know a lot of you don't even need me to show you how to do these because you're smart that way. I'll use orange. Of snowmobile renters, so snowmobile renters, that would be, how many total people are snowmobile renters? 574, that's the denominator. Said no, they're not an environmental club member. So we're looking at this row. They're not environmental club members. These numbers come from the same row. A second ago when I did the purple, look up here really quickly because this will help you figure out what kind of relative frequency you're dealing with. If your numbers come from the same row, like the orange circles, or the same column, like the purple ones, then that's how you know you're dealing with conditional relative frequency. So we'll get there in just a second. So the number of people that said no to that were 497. And 497 out of 574 is a very large proportion, 0.87. So numbers 5 and 6 are called conditional relative frequencies because they give you the percent or proportion of individuals who have a specific value of 1 categorical variable among individuals who share the same value of another one. Again, as a student, I don't really want you to memorize this, this big crazy textbook definition here. If you find that your numbers are in the fraction that you built, the numbers are in the same row or the same column, that's how you are going to know that it's conditional relative frequency. And we're just going to practice this, that's basically the rest of the notes. There's really only one more thing that I'll end up showing you that's new as we turn the page here. So we're going to move away from that example about snowmobiles, and we're going to talk about this. It's a little bit more morbid. In 1912, the Titanic, on its first voyage across the Atlantic, struck an iceberg and sank. Some passengers got off the ship, but many died. The two-way table gives information about the adult passengers, so everyone here represented as an adult, who survived and who died, and whether they traveled first class, second class, or third class. Okay, part A says, what proportion of adult passengers? So what would my denominator be if it's of the adult passengers? Yes, that's everybody. Good. Because everybody in this table represents the adult passengers on the Titanic. Good. How many survived? Survived 442. And both of those numbers are on the edge. So go ahead and figure out this proportion, and then I want you to add on there what kind of relative frequency it is. Is this marginal, joint, or conditional? Because of the way I wrote it, you might think conditional because they're in the same column. But technically, both of those numbers are on the edge, okay? They're in the margins. So if your numbers come from this very bottom row or this very outside column, both numbers, then it's called marginal relative frequency. Just as a little extra, because on your homework it may ask you that. Let's skip part B, and let's kind of keep working on the ones that we know how to do. Look at C. What percent of adults, that's everybody, traveled third class, and then there's the word and. So you have to look at traveled third class, which narrows it down to this column, and survived, which would be right here. So out of everybody, I want to know who traveled third class and survived. That's 151 people. Once a percent, 12.51%. Is that marginal, joint, or conditional? Joint. What's the giveaway? And. Good. Very, very good. Let's try D. What proportion of survivors? Okay, so I'm only looking at those who survived, which is 442 that survived, so that's the denominator of survivors. So I'm only looking at this row. We're third class, so that's this 151 again. So it just helps me to circle the things that go in the same fraction. I use the same color for them. You may think that's silly, and you don't have to do it. Proportion 0.34. Let's try E, and then we'll bounce back up to B. What percent of first class passengers, so of first class means that first class passengers are, that has to be my denominator. All the first class passengers, 319 of them. And out of that column of first class passengers, I want to know how many survived. That's the 197. Percent, 61.76. Oops, I forgot to ask you on these last two what type of frequency they are. So this helps me that I used purple on this one that we just did, E. They're in the same column. Conditional. On part D, I forgot to ask you, so let's see, I used orange for that one. So I'm right here and here. That's also going to be conditional, yes, because they're in the same row. It didn't use the word and they're not both in the margins, so it's got to be conditional in that one as well. Okay, let's go back up to B, and you see that there's a little bit more space there. The way that this is asked is weird, but the math behind it's really, really easy. So let's look at this and figure out what it wants. It says, find the distribution of class travel. Those three words I want you to underline, circle, highlight. Because when you come across a homework problem and it says, find the distribution of blank, that's how you know that that's how you're going to split your data apart. So if it's the distribution of class travel, then I want to know the percentage who traveled first class, who traveled second class, and who traveled third class. I'm not divvying it up between survived and died because the problem asked me to find the distribution of class travel. If it had said find the distribution of survival, then I would have split it up into survived versus died. Okay. What all you're going to do, the rest of it says for adult passengers on Titanic using relative frequencies. So what percent traveled first class? So look up in your table. Yeah, you're going to set up your fraction. 319 traveled first class out of how many? Everybody, 1,207. So you're going to just tell me the percent who traveled first class. That's 319 out of 1,207. And then you'll do the same for second class, 261 out of everybody. And third class was 627 people out of everybody. So the math is really easy. You're just going to have to know how to read it and how to divvy it up, how to split it up. So we're splitting this up by class travel. And it doesn't really specify if it wants proportions or percents, so I'll let you choose. But I want to have a little discussion here about, I'm going to leave it as proportion. Before you turn your page to the back, I want to talk about something really quick. When you add those three proportions together, or even if you turned yours into percents, when you add up all of your percents, what are you going to get when you add these decimals together? If you don't know, try it. You get one whole. Because this is everybody, this is 100% of the people on the ship, right? And it's just the percentage or the proportion who traveled each class. So those all have to add up to one whole, or if you change to percentages, then it has to add up to 100. the last page, we're ready to move on to the very last page of the notes. I told you this stuff was pretty easy. I hope you like it. It's kind of a breath of fresh air compared to standard deviation and mean and all that stuff. You're pretty much going to be on your own on the back here. Like, I'll walk around and kind of help you if you need it, but let's read through it and kind of see if we need to add some stuff to this table, okay? And here's a really good example of how statistics is used in real life. An article in the Journal of the American Medical Association reports the results of a study designed to see if the herb St. John's wort is effective in treating moderately severe cases of depression. The study involved 338 patients who were being treated for major depression. The subjects were randomly assigned to receive one of 3 treatments. And here in a little bit, we're going to have a whole chapter about how to design experiments. Okay, so they have to be randomly assigned to either take St. John's wort or Zoloft, which is a prescription drug that helps with depression, or a placebo, which just means it's like a sugar pill or something. So people don't know what they're taking. They just are part of the trial. They say, yeah, I'll try this. And they're given something. And it's one of those 3 things for an 8-week period. And the two-way table summarizes the data. So here are the 2 categorical variables. It's what treatment you took out of the 3. And if you had a full response change in depression, or maybe what you took kind of helped a little bit and you had a partial response, or whatever you took had no response at all. You didn't see any change in your depression. Okay, before we can answer questions, and I just kind of did you a favor and I copied and pasted them. They're really small here, but this way you could divvy it up instead of having to color code and all of that. What is missing from this 2A table that might end up being pretty important? The totals, right? Okay. Now that I said that, you're probably already grabbing your calculator. I want you to find the totals, find the margins. Just like that Titanic table and the snowmobile table, they had the totals for us. The only additional thing you have to do here is add everything up. So 113 people took St. John's wort. It's like 109 people took Zoloft. And 116 people took the placebo. Those aren't the only totals I need. I also need to know how many people had a full response to their depression. So I'm going to add the rows together. How many people had a partial response? And then it's your choice. Hopefully, a good way to check that you did this right is 91 plus 55 should give you the same sum as these bottom 3 numbers. And in the paragraph, it also said, oops, no response. I forgot that. I was like, wait a minute. No response. So 91 plus 55 plus 192. In the paragraph, it said 338 patients were given one of 3 treatments. And so here I have verified that my counts are correct. 338 total people were a part of this study. Okay, I'll help you with A, and then I'll walk around as you kind of finish it up. A says, what proportion of subjects who were assigned to take St. John's wort? Okay, so on this little one that I copied down here, you don't have to copy down all the totals over again. That's busy work. Think about what you need. You need to know how many were assigned to take St. John's wort. So we are just looking in the St. John's wort column. So that's the total I'm going to copy down from the top of the page. So that's the denominator of my fraction of those people. Oh, shoot, I did that wrong, didn't I? I didn't read properly. It says, what proportion of subjects? So out of everybody, which would be the 338, out of 338 total people, sorry guys, how many were randomly assigned to take St. John's wort? Helps if you read the whole thing. So those are the two totals that I needed from the top. Those are also from the margin. So this is marginal relative frequency. It asks you for that, but it doesn't. It says, the reason I'm helping you with this one is because it says explain why this makes sense. So here's what I got in the calculator. 0.33, which is like a third. Now why does that make sense? If I'm designing a study and I take this group of people and I need to randomly assign them to take one of 3 random pills, why does it make sense that 0.33 were assigned, or 33% were assigned to take St. John's wort? Because when we talk about designing experiments and studies, it's important for you to understand this stuff. Look right here if you don't know what I'm asking. See how these 3 numbers are pretty close together to make up the total? Why do I want these numbers to be pretty close together in this experiment? Why don't I want like 2 people taking St. John's wort and 327 taking Zoloft? And like, why do those all need to be close together? What do you think? You guys are too quiet. I bet some of you know. It makes sense because you want your number of patients taking your stuff, you want it to be divvied up pretty equally. You want about a third of everybody taking St. John's wort. You want about a third of everybody taking Zoloft. And then when you do your random assignments, you want about a third of all of your patients taking the placebo. So I want you to write, this makes sense because about 1/3, which is 0.3 repeating, pretty close to what we got, of patients were assigned to this treatment. And the chapter that we get to about designing studies is one of my favorite chapters in statistics overall. Okay, I'm going to leave you to do B, C, and D, and I'll just walk around and check your work. If you've got it, then you can pull up the assignment and go to town. If you need a little guidance, and I'll put the answers up on the screen here in just a little while too, if you just want to check your work that way. So press pause and then we'll... All right, on part B, what percent of the subjects? That means out of everybody. And if you're reading this quickly, then you might have just thought it said of everybody who took Zoloft. But it's out of everybody. Now I'm looking for took Zoloft and saw no response. So the Zoloft column, no response, that's 56 people. And then we'll just go through and kind of check the rest. So that was 16.57%. Part C. Let's see if you got this right, because this is a little different than the ones in the notes that we've looked at. What percent of subjects who took St. John's wort, so out of everyone who took St. John's wort, so 113 people, saw some kind of response? Well, what this means is I need to take into account the people who saw a full response and people who saw a partial response. That's some kind of response. So you're actually going to add the 27 and the 16 together. You're just leaving out everybody who didn't see a response at all. So if you missed that one, then that was probably your oversight, is you didn't add those together. You probably just went to like full response or partial response, but it's both of those. So that's 43 out of 113. And that is 38.05%. Now, if you're rounding differently than me, but you're getting something close to this, that's great. And then it looked like most everybody, as I walked around, was doing part D the correct way. What percent of subjects who saw a full response, so out of everyone who saw a full response, how many of those took Zoloft? 27 of those took Zoloft out of the 91. So 29.67%. So like if you put 30% right there, that's fine. You got the idea. You set up your fraction the right way. We just rounded differently. And that's it.